Well, I'm back to tackle something ridiculous. Ranking every blunder Patrick Star has ever committed in SpongeBob SquarePants. I know. Every single blunder? I spent 5 days researching for this video, so you can expect me to cover as many blunders as possible in less than 15 minutes. But how am I ranking these "Oh Patrick, why" moments? By impact, severity, hilarity, and most importantly, how hard I laughed while researching this insanity. Don't worry, I'm sparing you the spin-offs, games, and comics because I still value my sanity. Barely. So get ready as I am about to rip into your favorite pink starfish. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll wonder how he hasn't won an award for making bad decisions look so entertaining. I'm gonna ease you into this. These blunders are teeny tiny with mild consequences. Okay, I admit, they aren't that teeny tiny, but compared to what Patrick is capable of doing, these blunders are literally nothing. I mean, Patrick Star isn't exactly known for his problem-solving skills. In fact, most of the time, it feels like he solves problems by creating entirely new ones. But hey, not every blunder is catastrophic. Some are just confusing. Remember that time Patrick adopted a baby scallop? I'm talking about the episode Rockabye Bivalve, in which Patrick and SpongeBob decide to play house and adopt a baby scallop. It's all fun and games until Patrick takes on the role of the dad, which in Patrick's world means sitting under a rock all day while SpongeBob does everything. The cherry on top, he manages to make SpongeBob furious, the most optimistic guy to ever live in this universe. It's just a little sad.
We made a commitment and you're not doing your share. You never do anything.
I changed his diaper.
Yeah, once.
He's only this big.
Then there's Patrick's brilliant deduction skills on display in Something Smells. In this episode, SpongeBob whips up his infamous sundae made of ketchup, onions, and peanuts. This combination was so revolting that it turned Bikini Bottom into a ghost town. When SpongeBob comes to his best friend for help, Patrick, being the smartest guy in Bikini Bottom, suggests that SpongeBob is ugly and that's why all the fish are repelling him. It wasn't until the end of the episode when Patrick eventually figures out his friend was just stinking. You've got to wonder if Patrick even has a nose. And who could forget Patrick's unique talent for mistaking basic objects for, well, anything else? In Big Pink Loser, Patrick was determined to win a trophy, not for something specific, just a trophy for existing. He tried copying SpongeBob, which led to disastrous results, including setting the Krusty Krab's cash register on fire. In fact, in his quest to win an award, confuses everything, and I mean everything, for a jar. SpongeBob asks him to get a jar, and he starts getting everything other than a jar, even SpongeBob. Take a look at this scene for yourself. I mean, how can someone be so dumb?
First, get a jar. Patrick, that's a pickle.
Yes.
You need a jar. No.
But do you remember the time Patrick thought it'd be a good idea to eat peanuts with their shells? Sure, it sounds harmless, but come on, you don't eat shells along with peanuts while saying, "I get what I deserve."
I get what I deserve.
I know it's a teeny tiny moment, but I found it hilarious. I mean, Patrick's sheer lack of self-awareness just gets me every time. So this moment deserves a place in D tier. But what about his infamous mayonnaise is an instrument incident from the episode Band Geeks? Patrick is in the middle of a debate with Squidward during the iconic band practice. Asks the philosophical question no one wanted to hear, is mayonnaise an instrument?
People, settle down. Okay now. How many of you have played musical instruments before?
Is mayonnaise an instrument?
No, Patrick. Horseradish is not an instrument either.
Now, let's be honest, this is peak Patrick, a question so wildly irrelevant that it derails any semblance of progress. But is it harmful? Not really. It's just dumb enough to land him here, firmly in D tier. Though, let's face it, if Patrick had control over the band, they'd probably still be debating condiments while Squilliam's fancy friends rolled their eyes. Another one of Patrick's low-stakes gems, the Wumbo fiasco from the episode Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 4. You know, the one where SpongeBob accidentally shrinks Squidward with Mermaid Man's belt, and Patrick swoops in with his brilliant advice, "You gotta set it to Wumbo"? Is Wumbo a real thing? No. Did it solve the problem? Also no. But Patrick's confidence in his non-existent expertise is what makes it hilarious. It's a classic, he's trying his best, but his best isn't good enough moment. Honestly, it reminds me of my YouTube career. Coming back to Patrick, in the grand scheme of things, it didn't cause any permanent damage, just some temporary confusion and probably a lot of regret for trusting Patrick in the first place. Oh, and let's not forget this epic misunderstanding of the free balloon day concept in Life of Crime. While watching a crime movie with Mr. Krabs tells SpongeBob and Patrick that borrowing things is fine as long as they return them before they're missed. Patrick, being the smart guy he is, took this to heart, and SpongeBob, being the best friend he is, also followed. They borrow a balloon from a stand since they have no money. But when the balloon accidentally pops, they panic, assuming they've committed theft. The two decide to flee Bikini Bottom because they were like, "We are now fugitives because we stole a balloon." Turns out it was National Free Balloon Day, so they didn't technically steal anything, but they were already camping in the wilderness and coming to terms with leaving their old lives behind. Well, they also see the upsides of their new outlaw lifestyle because they no longer had to follow society's rules. But again, Patrick makes another blunder. When they felt hunger, SpongeBob reveals that he has 2 chocolate bars. Patrick immediately eats his and accuses SpongeBob of stealing it. Frustrated, SpongeBob eats his own candy bar, leading Patrick to threaten to report him to the police. Their rivalry ends up in a mad dash to the police station where they confess their crime. The officers were laughing hilariously at them before they informed them that it was National Free Balloon Day and that no crime was committed. The officers give them lollipops for the road, but Patrick quickly eats his and hilariously accuses SpongeBob of stealing it. But again, they go as far as to flee town over what? A couple of cents? I know, it's ridiculous, but Patrick's knack for blowing things out of proportion is on full display here. But the crowning jewel of D tier has to be the chocolate bar hoard disaster from Chocolate with Nuts. Remember when SpongeBob and Patrick decide to sell chocolate bars door to door? Instead of actually selling them, Patrick accidentally buys an entire stockpile for himself, immediately dumping down their profits. Financially, it's a mess, but it's harmless in the long run. Plus, it's kind of relatable. Who among us hasn't splurged on chocolate after a rough day? D-tier Patrick is lovable in his incompetence. These are the moments you'd roll your eyes at, but ultimately forgive. But things start getting messier and less forgivable in the C tier. If there's one thing Patrick has proven time and time again, it's that he's about as employable as a sea cucumber. Somehow, Patrick always manages to turn even the simplest job into a disaster waiting to happen. For example, Patrick's brief, disastrous stint at the Chum Bucket in Chum Bucket Supreme. Plankton, in a rare stroke of poor judgment, which is saying something, hires Patrick to help promote his business. And Patrick, being Patrick, suggests the groundbreaking slogan, "Chum is fun." Amazingly, this bizarre line actually works, drawing crowds of curious customers. But in true Patrick fashion, he just can't do anything right. Plankton gives him an important assignment, which is to come up with new slogans. But all Patrick does is to write the old slogan in 1,000 different ways. Eventually, he gets burnt out with a literal hole in his head. And Plankton, being the smart, evil guy he is, ends up losing all his customers. So while Patrick was able to fill up the Chum Bucket with customers, he couldn't simply do his job right. At least, SpongeBob is better than him at giving extraordinary customer service. Then there's Patrick's long and tortured relationship with boating school. In New Student Starfish, Patrick decides to join SpongeBob in Mrs. Puff's class. What could go wrong, right? Oh, just everything. SpongeBob is proud of his reputation as the star student with the most good noodle stars. However, things quickly spiral out of control. Patrick's nervous introduction as 24 leads to an inside joke that he and SpongeBob can't stop laughing at, much to Mrs. Puff's annoyance. Since Patrick was new, Mrs. Puff let him off the hook with a warning, but she was expecting better behavior from her top student, so she gave SpongeBob a stronger warning. But Patrick didn't stop here. He drew a mocking picture of Mrs. Puff and put it on SpongeBob's desk, which gets SpongeBob in trouble yet again. This pattern continues as Patrick disrupts the class and repeatedly lands SpongeBob in hot water. He kept annoying SpongeBob without realizing that his friend is getting in trouble because of him. And the tension between the two friends finally boils over during recess, where SpongeBob confronts Patrick about his thoughtless behavior. The argument ends with both of them being sent to detention.
SpongeBob SquarePants, I hereby sentence you and your friend to detention.
Detention?
How would you feel if your friend gets you sent to detention? And if you have watched the Life of Crime episode, you probably remember the wallet scene. In this episode, Patrick goes full gaslighter when Man Ray tries to return his wallet. Despite being shown clear evidence, his ID, his picture, his name, Patrick insists, "It's not my wallet." It's selfish, it's annoying, and it's so perfectly Patrick. While this moment didn't cause physical harm, it's the principle of the thing. Patrick's refusal to cooperate could drive anyone to their breaking point, which is why this lands it solidly in C tier. Or take the ticket-eating incident from Smooth Jazz at Bikini Bottom, when Squidward scores tickets to his dream jazz concert. Patrick ruins everything in the most literal way possible. He eats the tickets. Yes, eats them. And when SpongeBob wins replacement tickets and backstage passes, Patrick decides to devour those too. While Patrick doesn't seem to grasp the concept of concert tickets are not food, his reckless behavior ruined Squidward's night. For someone who claims to be Squidward's neighbor and friend, this was beyond selfish. And how can we forget the ultimate bragging session in Driven to Tears? SpongeBob's lifelong struggle to get his boating license is well known, so when Patrick manages to pass his driving test, you'd think he'd be a little more sympathetic. Nope. Patrick spends the entire episode rubbing it in SpongeBob's face, boasting about his accomplishment and showing zero empathy for SpongeBob's feelings. To make matters worse, Patrick's shitty driving shows that he didn't deserve that license in the first place. I mean, imagine bragging about something you're objectively terrible at. Then there's the time he hunted SpongeBob in nature pants. When SpongeBob decides to live among the jellyfish, Patrick initially pleads for him to come home. I agree, it was a rare moment of genuine care. But when SpongeBob refuses, Patrick's sadness turns into something far more disturbing. It was full-on predator mode. Instead of respecting his friend's decision, Patrick starts hunting SpongeBob with a jellyfish net. He was basically acting as if he's gone completely feral. The image of Patrick charging at SpongeBob with wild determination is disturbing, to say the least. One of Patrick's most jaw-dropping blunder moves comes in Gone, when Bikini Bottom celebrates National No SpongeBob Day. SpongeBob wakes up to find the entire town deserted. He later discovers that everyone, including Patrick, has left to celebrate a day specifically designed to avoid him.
A whole day dedicated to getting away from you.
A day? But you guys have been away for weeks.
Yeah, well, we kind of milked it a little.
I know, the entire town celebrated this day, but as SpongeBob's supposed best friend, Patrick's participation in this cruel tradition feels like a betrayal on another level. And let's not forget Patrick's hypocrisy in Little Yellow Book. In this episode, Squidward finds SpongeBob's diary and starts reading it aloud to the Krusty Krab customers. Instead of defending his friend's privacy, Patrick joins in on the teasing. He's literally mocking SpongeBob. But when SpongeBob starts crying and the crowd turns on Squidward, Patrick acts like he's the moral authority. He starts berating Squidward for doing the very thing he was guilty of moments earlier. If there's one thing worse than selfishness, it's hypocritical selfishness. But now it's time for the juicy stuff, the blunders that go beyond harmless incompetence and start towing the line of genuine danger. These moments aren't oopsies. They will literally make you question how Patrick isn't serving time in Bikini Bottom jail. For example, we've got Big Sister Sam, where Patrick reconnects with his long-lost sister, Sam. What should have been a touching family reunion turns into a nightmare for Squidward and SpongeBob. Sam destroys both of their homes, repeatedly injures Squidward, and all the while, Patrick defends her. He is scolding his friends for being mean to her. Sure, sibling loyalty is admirable, but not at the cost of everyone else's well-being. I would say that encouraging Sam's destructive rampage lands this moment firmly in B tier. If this wasn't enough of a big blunder, Patrick insists in the jellyfishing episode that Squidward firmly grasp a jellyfish net. He ends up jamming the net straight through Squidward's hand. This moment literally borders on slapstick horror. Squidward may not be the nicest guy, but no one deserves Patrick's brand of helpfulness. Then there's I'm with Stupid, where Patrick hits a new low in his treatment of SpongeBob. To impress his visiting parents, who, spoiler alert, aren't even his real parents, Patrick convinces SpongeBob to act dumb to make himself look smarter. At first, it seems like harmless roleplay, but Patrick quickly takes it too far. He mocks and humiliates SpongeBob even when they're alone. And if you watch the Karate Star episode, you will see that Patrick learns karate and immediately goes on a chopping rampage. Dubbed the Mad Chopper, Patrick single-handedly terrorizes Bikini Bottom. He destroys everything in sight. It's a perfect example of how quickly Patrick lets power go to his head. And in the card episode, Patrick gets a hold of a rare Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy card. SpongeBob does everything he can to protect it, but Patrick intentionally puts it and himself in harm's way, all for his own amusement. By the end of the episode, Patrick's bizarre and borderline sociopathic behavior has done irreparable damage to both the card and SpongeBob's spirit. This is basically cruelty with a side of malice. But if B tier makes you question Patrick's intelligence, A tier will make you question everything. In this tier, Patrick's blunders graduate from harmful to downright unforgivable. These moments show Patrick at his absolute worst. I mean, these are the kinds of actions that make you wonder why SpongeBob even bothers staying friends with him. For example, there's Suds, where SpongeBob falls ill after leaving the fridge open all night and catching a cold. He's desperate for medical help and considers going to the doctor, but Patrick convinces him otherwise by telling him that the doctor's office is full of torture devices and outdated magazines.
Waiting room?
Is that the horrible part, Patrick?
No, it gets worse. They make you read old magazines.
Instead, Patrick volunteers to treat SpongeBob himself, which leads to a series of outrageous home remedies. Patrick's home remedies include shoving corks into SpongeBob's pores and inflating him like a balloon. Not only does he make SpongeBob's condition worse, but his meddling almost costs him the proper care he desperately needs. Naturally, Patrick's treatments only make SpongeBob's condition worse. It's only when Sandy steps in and takes SpongeBob to the doctor that he finally gets the proper care he needs. Another classic example of Patrick's lack of responsibility is Pet Sitter Pat. When SpongeBob gives Patrick the important task of caring for Gary while he's away, things go downhill faster. Patrick eats all of Gary's food, starves him, and tries to bathe him with a flamethrower. By the end of the episode, the pineapple is flooded, Gary is traumatized, and Patrick walks away scot-free. It's hard to think of a worse pet sitter. Let me know in the comments below if you know a pet sitter who can compete with Patrick. And then we have the moment from the Splinter episode where SpongeBob calls Patrick for help after getting a nasty splinter.
Listen, Mr. SpongeBob. Now, let's see where the problem's at.
Instead of offering any real assistance, Patrick makes the situation exponentially worse with pushing the splinter deeper into SpongeBob's hand. If you thought he stopped harassing his friends at this point, just watch the Ink Lemonade episode from the 11th season. In this episode, Patrick scares Squidward to harvest his ink. He is turning the poor cephalopod into a source of profit. But the absolute worst is still to come. I mean, sometimes harassing his friends can lead to destruction of the entire Bikini Bottom. For example, in the Texas episode, Sandy becomes homesick for Texas, and Patrick decides to cheer her up by mocking her home state in front of everyone. I know this is just a harmless joke, but his constant insults make Sandy so mad that she nearly tears Bikini Bottom apart. This isn't the only time Patrick's blunders have had catastrophic consequences. In Pat No Pay, Patrick eats 50 Krabby Patties with extra cheese, but guess what? He doesn't have the money to pay for it. Of course, Mr. Krabs wants his money, so he forces Patrick to work at the Krusty Krab to cover his debt. But Patrick, he's first caught eating hand soap, then he destroys the freezer, and then he manages to damage the compactor and accidentally triggers a series of events that ultimately blow up the entire Krusty Krab. Even the superheroes aren't safe from his blunders. In Back to the Past, Patrick and SpongeBob have to freeze Man Ray using a jar of tartar sauce. Simple, right? Not for Patrick. He eats the tartar sauce. When they return to the present, they find that Man Ray has taken over the entire world. You know what this means? That either Mermaid Man or Barnacle Boy has died in this dystopian timeline. Let that sink in. I know, I didn't include every single time Patrick messed up. My research is done for now, but don't worry, there will be a part 2 coming soon. And hey, who else deserves a ranking? SpongeBob's driving fails? Mr. Krabs' stingiest moments? You name it, and I'll do it. Until then, thanks for watching, and remember, if Patrick can survive his blunders, maybe there's hope for the rest of us.